In today's episode, we're going to start off with the metaphor to cross the Rubicon. Ben, are you familiar with this phrase?
Yeah, somewhat. It's like you're taking a step where you're crossing a threshold of no return, right?
Yeah, once you cross it, you can't go back. Do you know the history behind this phrase?
Not super well, no.
Well, let's have a little history lesson then and start off with crossing the Rubicon.
Hey, that'd be great.
Yeah. This goes back to Rome and Julius Caesar. In fact, it's the last stages of the Republic. After this, we go into it becomes the Roman Empire. And it all circles around this one guy named Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, he is constantly looking for like power and glory and trying to bring honor to the Caesar name. And he goes out and he's kind of rising the ladder of success in Rome, especially through war and his successes as war. But he comes together and he finds two other guys, Crassus in Pompeii. And he gets with them and he says, hey, let's create a triumvirate. Do you know what a triumvirate is?
No, I don't. What is a triumvirate?
A triumvirate is you have three players. You have you have Pompey, you have Crassus, and Caesar, and each one takes a certain part of government and says, we're going to be over this. Here's our strengths, and we're going to rule Rome together as the three of us.
Kind of a council of three.
Council of three. And so he gets together with them. And he's going to go off to battle because he is trying to create a name for himself. So he goes off to far-off lands, fighting a war, and he finds out that Crassus, one of the men in the triumvirate, he is going off and trying to seek his own glory. Well, he dies. Caesar finds out that Pompey takes all power to himself. Why this is gone. Well, this starts precipitating a civil war and rumblings in Rome, because Caesar is not real happy. And so he's coming back to Italy, and there's this river called the Rubicon. And Rome gives this mandate, hey, Caesar, if you cross this Rubicon, you are going to be considered an enemy to the state. And so Caesar, he's sitting in front of this river, and he gets some of his counselors together, and they're deciding, do we cross this? Do we not cross this? What do we do? And he goes back and forth like this is a big decision. This will create a crossroads in Roman history that will change the course of Rome forever. And so eventually he decides, you know what? Let's do this. He crosses the Rubicon and he says the die has been cast. What does the die has been cast mean?
I think you're taking a gamble. You're putting your foot forward. You're going to give it a try.
Yeah, if you're a gambler and once you throw that dice, your fate is sealed. You know, you're either going to walk out with lots of money or you're going to lose everything, in a split second. Well, this is Caesar's decision as he ends up crossing the Rubicon, and he knows once he crosses, he can't go back. He goes into Rome and a civil war ensues. Pompey, he runs away to Egypt. Caesar takes over. He goes and chases down Pompey. He finds out Pompey has been assassinated, and Caesar becomes the ruler of Rome. What are the implications and the parallelism of today? And think, the last episode, we ended with an election crisis. How does this parallelism come in today?
Well, I think there's a lot of parallels to today. Right? It seems there's an election crisis at this time, or a crisis of the powers that be. And I think there is also a parallel with the crossing of the Rubicon. I think the nation is going in a direction that there's this threshold to be crossed, that there will be no return.
Yeah, I know we're only a couple of months away from the election, but I don't think we've seen everything. I don't think the total election crisis has come into play yet.
Right, which is crazy because we've seen so much going on already.
And I think these last 2 months people will look back and say, oh my gosh, what? How did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's other parallelisms too of this was the end of the Roman Republic, right?
Right.
It ended with an election crisis. It ended with a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at today, we are 50-50. There is a lot of hate going around with political ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no middle ground. There's no compromise. America used to be built upon this idea of compromise.
Mm-hmm.
There's no compromise anymore. It is, you are either all in, and if you're all in, you have to believe all of these things. Boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
Or else you're not a part of us.
Right. In fact, if you don't believe all of these things, you're attacked, right?
Well, it goes back to the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Identity politics has become king,
mm-hmm.
where if you don't fit in, this is who you are, and if you don't vote this way, or if you have a different opinion than the mob,
mm-hmm.
then you're not a part of us. And I think it's very essential for people to feel like they belong to something. And
right.
so it's creating this huge division in America. So the parallelism is, A, we have an election crisis. B, we have a civil war brewing in America. This idea of, are you for us? If you're not for us, you're against us. If you're not a part of us, then if you're not all in, then you're not a part of us.
Right.
And so this identity politics is playing a big role as well. Another parallel that is happening is because of what's happening, these two things of the election crisis and the civil war, even if it's not a war of guns and those types of things, it's still a civil war. It is this side or this side.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing is you have the republic dying. If you can't find compromise in a republic, then, that's the most important part of being a republic is you're able to meet in the middle and find compromise. And through that compromise, you can find stability. To illustrate this, I want to talk a little bit about the glass blowers during the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, these glass blowers, they were in these factories, and it would cause this extreme heat inside. They're blowing glass, and they would have to drink 60 pints of water a day, which is 7.5 gallons of water. That's a lot of water for an individual to drink, right? What do they say is the amount of water a person should drink? 8 glassfuls of water a day or something?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is 7.5 gallons to withstand this heat in the factory. Some of the problems they had is inside the factory, some of them stopped sweating, and so their bodies drinking all this water, it would start bloating, and they were getting bigger and bigger, and they were like, oh my gosh, we got to get this person out. And they found that they take the person out of the factory, out of the heat, and they would have to slowly just start massaging their body, their feet, their arms to get the sweat to excrete. Upon doing this, the person start sweating again, and then they could go back in and withstand the heat and continue drinking their water. What do you think? This seems like a strange story to start out with the end of the Republic. What do you see the parallelism is with this?
What I take from this story is heat's on high right now. Tensions are high, right? We're being overloaded with all of this information from all different sides. We're kind of bloating up. We're feeling this extreme tension. I think the parallel is, or the idea of this is, hey, we are at a point of death or heat stroke or whatever it may be because we are in these conditions. So I think the question or the point of this is, hey, as we're bloated up, as we're feeling this extreme pressure, what are we going to do to start sweating again? What are we going to do to get outside of the factory, get our little massage? Who are we calling out to? Where are we reaching out to so that we can start to feel again or see clearly again?
And this is why I love history, because I feel like only through the lens of history, looking at the past and finding the parallels of today and yesterday, we can really find out where we're headed to, what our future is going to look like. And I think a lot of people, they want to put their head in the sand, right? And pretend like nothing is happening. But we can see today really clear parallels of what is going on. Because of that, I think we need to go a little bit further into the foundation of America. The genius of the American experience, or the American experiment, is what they called it, because it had never been done before.
Mm-hmm.
Because they gave the power to the individual and to communities. Because they protected man's inalienable rights, which, as we talked about last time, were life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And with these protections in place, communities were thriving. It's on this community level where the needs of the individuals are seen readily. Mm-hmm. You know, it's almost like back in the day, it was like, oh my gosh, the Thompsons' barn burned down. Well, that's okay. We got to have a barn raising ceremony. So everybody would get together, help the Thompsons out, get rid of the old barn and raise up another barn. You know, all in a day, the community would come together. Yeah. Not only that, they said, hey, let's bring food and a fiddle on top of that, and after we'll have a dancing party, right?
It seems like a community, a people really thrives when the government is this local system, right? When it's on this local level.
Well, I think that different demographics call for different
supports and services, things like that.
Exactly. You just have such unique obligations on this level, but you can really see those. And so on this level, you're looking at what people need, and you're finding the less fortunate. They're easily found, and you're lifting each other up and helping them to become better or to thrive in their hard situations.
What I think of this system of governing is that the beauty is that there is no blanket answer, right? Each community needs something different, something new, something unique. And so when you have this beautiful localized government where the individual is protected, where the family is protected, it's this very, as you were saying, it protects the individuals. It really helps the individual. You find the poor, the needy. It's very a beautiful individualized system.
Well, and I think, you know, in rural Midwest, the schools are going to be largely different than the big cities of New York or Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to find that localized niche that everybody kind of needs of the children on upward. In fact, in early American history, Americans had this huge distrust of government. Like, they did not want it involved in their lives. They didn't want them to tax too high. I mean, this is what caused the American Revolution in the first place. They wanted them to stay out of their lives. And because of their distrust of government, they wanted it so localized, and on such a state level, they created the Articles of Confederation. And this is the 13 original states. They created the Confederation to keep government as localized as possible. However, the Articles of Confederation, and it was just too weak. The federal government had no power. And so the delegates, the founding fathers, they got together in 1787 in Philadelphia, and they said, whoa, we either need to fix this or scrap it and start anew. And they decided on the latter, which is let's scrap it and start anew, which created our Constitution of today. But even with the Constitution, it still curbed the federal government. The federal government did not have that much power. I mean, it is only 7 articles and 10 amendments compared to other governments of the day. I think the other nations would look at it and say, that's it? That's all you got? Like, this is all you're doing? Because it gave so much power to the people. And if you look at those 7 articles, it really enumerates the little power the government had. And I think it was such an amazing thing for men to create, because it's almost as if they weren't looking for the power that normally would happen creating a new nation. It had just enough power to be in perfect harmony with the individual, the communities, the states, and the federal government working all together. And it was only to preserve and to bring order and peace so that peoples could thrive in their environments, right? In the individual communities.
Right. I think that's the beauty of our foundation, is it was set up in such a way that the government didn't muddy the water. They weren't in everybody's business. It was, this is your sole charge, and now thrive.
Well, there are so many stories of immigrants coming to America penniless in these early days, where governments were just taking everything they had, and then they would come to the shores of America, and it was a rags to riches, right? Look at Carnegie coming and becoming one of the richest men in America, coming with nothing. I think that's this idea. And I know everybody didn't become rich, but I think it was the idea, it was this hope that we can make something of ourselves if we just had a government to protect us, or we just have a government that will give us and recognize that we have rights, inalienable rights from God, that the government should not be able to touch.
Right. This is all the American dream, right? There's a reason that phrase was coined, the American dream. You're not hearing it about anywhere else, right?
Well, and that's also goes along with the pursuit of happiness. One individual's pursuit of happiness goes along with that individual dream.
Yeah. Where else did you find that? Where else can you find that?
I don't think you can find it anywhere else on earth. And this is what made it so special, and this is why America became the great melting pot, because so many people were coming and enjoying the fruits of what this could provide. Even that hope or that idea is really powerful in an individual's life.
Right. Hearing about the land of liberty draws one to it.
Here's the problem with government, though. Government is never content. And the founders knew this, but government will grow and grow and take and take. They can't be content. It never stops getting bigger.
And that's if left unchecked by the governed, right?
And the problem is, though, but as it gets bigger and as it takes more and more control, it has to have more and more money. So let's go through just a little timeline of money, right,
Okay.
to see what the government does.
Let's see it.
Government started off with, how do we tax the people? Oh, a sales tax. That's fair. And I think most of the Americans were like, that's fair. We're okay to give a little part of our money in the state of sales to build roads, hospitals, those kind of necessities in a society.
Right.
Well, then it moved, and people were content with that in the late 17 and all of the 1800s. But then in the 1900s, they were like, we need a little bit more money. Let's create an income tax, and it's just for the rich.
Right.
Well, pretty soon, and we'll never go past the rich.
Yeah.
And it was only 1% of the rich's income. Well, that's not enough anymore. We need more money. Well, let's start taxing the middle class.
And they'll never go past that, right? Never past the middle class.
We'll never go past the middle class. But then even getting to the 1970s, they're like, we've got this problem. It's called the gold standard. Our money has to be backed by gold and silver, but then we can't get more money. So Nixon, he gets rid of the gold standard, and it's like, well, if we have a percentage of gold in the bank, well, we can use that and create more money. Well, then we just got rid of the gold and silver altogether, and the government's like, okay, well, we've got this problem. It's called the debt ceiling, right? We have to spend what we make. Think of an individual, right? And with their finances, like, what's the best advice ever?
Live within your means.
Live within your means. Don't spend more than what you have. Well, the government doesn't understand this because the government...
They're above all of that, right, in their minds.
They have to be above it because all they can think is control, more and more control. We have to control more aspects of this or that to protect the people. And pretty soon you have a government that says, well, why can't we just print money with impunity? And soon that's what we become. You become, this is a stage of government where the government becomes bloated. And it spends more and more money. And the last stages of a republic, going back to one of the signs of a republic, is a government can't live within its means, and it gets to the place where it is like, we can print with impunity? Well, why didn't we think of that before? Well, there's reason why we didn't, but we'll get to that in a later episode. To keep this short, let's keep going down some of these trends that we can see in some of these parallels.
Would you say that this is part of the crossing of the Rubicon, this idea of print without consequence or regard?
I think it is. For a government to say I can do this, it's a crossing of the Rubicon. Because once you learn that you can just print money, would you ever go back?
No. Why would you ever, quote unquote, limit yourself after that?
Well, who are you going to tax after this? You can only tax the people so much before they rebel. Because once the people are taxed so much, then they start rebelling. The governments know this. And so that's their answer. That becomes their answer. This is the government's crossing of the Rubicon is, I will print, and pretty soon everybody's like, isn't this great? Everybody wins. But we're going to see the repercussions of what happens when a government gets to that place.
Yeah, because it never lasts.
As government grows, what do you think happens to politicians?
It's a good question. I think they become professional politicians, right? They become drunken with power.
Well, they see all this money coming in, right? They see all this money coming in, and they're like, oh, maybe I deserve a little bit of this.
I'd like a chunk.
And I think a little bit of corruption. They start looking for groups. I'll support this group and this group. What did you say? And instead of it's, what will I do for the people, it's, what will the people do for me, right? What will I get by helping this organization out or this organization out?
Right. They start seeking approval ratings and brownie points.
And that takes us to what is a republic meant to do? A lot of people say we're a democracy, and I hear politicians even today all the time, or news outlets say we're a democracy. We're not a democracy. We're a republic. What is a republic?
I actually don't know.
A democracy is vote by the majority, right? Everybody's voting. Everybody in Greece, everybody would put a rock in. Is a hole, a white rock if you vote yes, a black rock if you vote no, and majority rule. And the founders created a republic, which is a government through representation. So you elect these representatives in who closely align with your ideas, and you vote them in so that you have time to spend making money or doing these other things, finding your pursuit of happiness. And so that you're not fully having to be involved in government, you vote in representatives to go and do that for you. They become your voice, and they go out and they are supposed to say, hey, I'm going to protect your inalienable rights. I'm going to make sure that you are protected and that you have a say, and I'll be that.
In essence, they speak on our behalf.
I'll speak on your behalf. But a republic has to have a key ingredient or something that allows it to continue to thrive. Do you know what that might be?
It would be the moral code of the people.
It's not only the moral code of the people, it has to be the moral code of your representatives as well.
Right.
John Adams, who says, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That is the key ingredient. If a republic doesn't have that, then you are doomed, and that is another part of that disintegration of the republic is when the government starts spending lots and lots of money and start taking more and more power. The next ingredient is when the nation loses its moral code and its religiosity. I look at religiosity as more than just, hey, I'm going to church every week. What would you think? What do you think of when you hear the word religiosity?
Well, I think for me, when you look at all of these different religious sects or people, it creates in a person certain moralities and instills in them certain values. And so I think you're right, it's more than, hey, I'm going to go to church, but it's, hey, because of my belief in something higher that says I should act higher, I will live my life in this way.
Yeah, and if you put that on a national level, it's almost like religiosity, I think, means respect or a sacredness in a way. It is a sacredness to what our flag represents, or a sacredness to the American ideals of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. or taking this idea of freedom. When the Star Spangled Banner is played, everybody stops and puts their hand on their heart in sign of this sacred respect for the nation and for the rights that we have. Do you see that religiosity or that sacredness today, or do you think we are losing it to some sense?
I would say we see it very seldom. I think in a lot of ways it's actually being attacked. Yeah, it's being attacked in a lot of ways. We've seen pushes out there to remove the phrase "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance. And we've seen many organizations come into place that are literally saying we want to destroy the nuclear family. We want to steer clear of these foundational principles that we've been given.
If you watch certain shows today and maybe satires of the American culture today, there's nothing sacred in it. It's the sacredness. I think there were things that were untouchable that you shouldn't touch, but I think we don't care to cross those boundaries anymore, and we are not afraid to push the envelope as far as we can, to the point where you will hear swear words all the time.
We see in our nation today steering away from those old-fashioned values. We see that cussing, swearing has become more prominent in TV shows, in our social medias, in our daily interactions. That sacredness of the spoken word is gone. The sacredness of sex has been trampled on, right? It's in every show that you watch. It's discussed everywhere daily. It's become the hot topic. There has been a trampling upon God in heaven who gave us life, who gave us these liberties, these inalienable rights, where he's being pushed out of everything. Nothing is sacred anymore. There's a blaspheming of him.
Well, and I think this is how a republic starts dying from within, because if you don't have politicians who you can trust, I think the trust in Congress is at an all-time low right now, and or close to an all-time low. People don't think that government can fix easy, simple problems because they're finding that it's all about them.
Right.
It's all about their agenda. I'm going to get this person out at any cost. I don't care what it does to the people. I'll make sure that we win. Right?
Right. They become the elite class. It's no longer we're representing the people. It's like you're saying, we're pushing our own thing at all costs. The people have been made to be lemmings, to follow this way or that, instead of to represent and push the government to go what way that they feel is right.
Well, and it's always been the duty of the media to be the watchdog of government. They were the ones who were supposed to have this unbiased opinion to protect those American ideals, and to say when government would cross boundaries, they would be the ones to step in and say, whoa, this isn't right. You need to stop, and they would put it out to the public. And so it was a way for the public to know exactly what was going on, and because you would have these journalists, and I don't think we can define journalism as what it was in yesteryear. Today, I think it's very biased reporting.
Right, whereas it used to be an objective journalism.
Which is?
It's that they're not choosing a side in everything that they broadcast and report. It's not that they're slanting their material in a certain direction. It's that they are stating nothing but fact and truth and allowing the people to judge the information.
As we start seeing these simple ideals disintegrate, such as trust in the politicians, religiosity, which is the sacredness of American ideals, as we see the deterioration of the family, and as we start seeing the deterioration of sacredness, do you feel like there's a correlation between government growing and the disintegration of our basic idealistic beliefs, American idealistic beliefs?
I do. This is what I see. Going back to the So going back to the John Adams quote, talking about a religious and a moral people, I think when you have that, they are basing their views, their actions, their ideas on something higher in the God who gave them life. But as government begins to grow, it pushes away those founding morals and principles, and in certain ways starts to try to fill those roles as I am God. Your rights come from government. Your rights come from us, right?
Well, I think that power that comes from the crises, it's a very addictive power, and I don't think government necessarily thinks, okay, what can I do next? I think sometimes they have good intentions, but those good intentions is what's the quote? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yep.
And that's where government starts heading towards, is even though they have good intentions, you start missing out and you start redefining what America is. Even today, this idea that we're going to change history, this idea of we're going to destroy the past and make it a more equitable past, I think there's a danger within that, because you can't learn from your past mistakes. There always has to be a yin and yang in America.
The fine balance.
It is such a fine balance, and if you look at it, it is. In history, I like to call it, you have the right hand, which everybody can see what is happening, and then you have the left hand, which is not necessarily seen. But it creates this balance in history, and it creates this balance in our culture of opposition. And this is what the two parties bring, right? They bring an opposition to. In a republic, you have to have the opposition. You have to have the right hand. You have to have the left hand. And what that does is it brings about progress. And it does this. Opposition is so important in a republic, and it always has been there. You have the Federalists against the Anti-Federalists. You look at Thomas Jefferson, and his opposite was Alexander Hamilton. On one hand, you have Thomas Jefferson, who was an anti-federalist, and on the other hand, with the Foundation of America, and on the other hand, you have Alexander Hamilton, who was a federalist. And had both of them been the same, and if they both had the same way of thinking, I don't think America would be what it is today, because they would become safe or feel safe, and they would put themselves, okay, we're good with this. But I look at Thomas Jefferson, and he was such a genius. You read his writings and you're just like, wow, this guy really, really had it together. But then you look at Alexander Hamilton, who was a genius in his own right, who you read his writings, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is, he too had these ideals, but they didn't like each other, but they were constantly pushing each other. It was the yin and yang. And then in the middle, you had Washington, right? Who would be like, okay, let's find common sense between your genius and your genius. Let's find the middle ground and see where we can create a better government.
He was a bridge builder.
Bridge builder. But those two oppositions, they kept on pushing each other. And there's a greatness in that. And I think in a republic, you constantly have opposition. But it continually helps the nation grow into what it is today. Even if you go further back, there is this huge debate. Did America start with Jamestown, or did it start with the Pilgrims? Did it start with Jamestown in 1607, or did it start with the Pilgrims in 1620? And there's been this big debate. I think it might be both. Because in Jamestown, you had the people who came over from England, and they were all about gold. I'm going to be rich. And it started building this idea, this principle, right? Like coming over to this new land is going to I'm going to make money. But then you have the Pilgrims who came over, and they had this pure religiosity that is, we're coming over here to be free. We don't want to be controlled. We want to live our religion and not have anybody push down and tell us what that religion is supposed to look like.
Right. To worship as our hearts dictate.
And I think it's almost a representation of the battle within all of us. This yin and yang pole, which creates this beauty in the Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's always this beautiful yin and yang and this pole. But what's important to understand is there will always be this give and take. There will always be this compromise, because this compromise is within the human spirit, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
There is this pole within all of us of, did we start in Jamestown with greed, or did we start in the Puritans with this religious movement, this purity, these great intentions, these we will not be controlled, and putting it out that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the beauty of where we began, is that we have both, right? This is a nation of freedom where we can come to achieve success financially. We can fulfill our pursuit of happiness, but on the same token, we can also follow our own conscience, right? We can.
Well, this is why I bring this up, because even in the foundational America, even if we can go back to the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists, Republicans, Democrats, even going further back to the Pilgrims and Jamestown, the beauty of America was we kept on pushing each other through opposition, but we were always able to find this great compromise in the middle. And this allowed successes and to grow, but it also helped us to not let groups get lost as we went along. It wasn't about majority rule. It was, hey, don't forget about the minority. And you kept on having this push and pull, but there was always a compromise. And with this compromise, you find the beauty of the American spirit. What happens if you lose the bridge builder and you have two parties that go rogue and say, there's no more building bridges? It is our side.
Well, I think that's when a nation goes into tyranny/anarchy, because it seems that these two groups will do anything, underhanded or whatever it may be, to fulfill their ends. Rule of law goes out the window.
Well, and then it becomes the push for whatever is good for the party, right?
Right.
It's not whatever is good for the people. It's whatever is good for the party, and we will do whatever it takes, even if it means trampling upon the people to get our agendas passed.
Right.
We're constantly in the state of yin and yang, and just as we see it prevalent in our politics and in our nation, and where we've had this two-party system, it's also within all of us individually, where we are constantly striving to become and wanting to be better people. I hope, in one way or another, but I think that's where where the road takes us to is when we get to a place where the Republic is dying. And why is the Republic dying? We've answered some of those questions, but we want to look at it a little deeper here, within this dual nature of a republic, which is when you lose that ability to start to build bridges, and you lose the ability to compromise
to find that common ground
within the people, then I had a teacher growing up that always said, "Don't be a lemming, don't be a lemming." We're like, what is a lemming? And he says, "I'll tell you what a lemming is." And then he drew these little figures on the board, and he said they're these little things, and they just follow each other right off a cliff. They don't look one way or the other way. It's kind of like what we were talking about in the first one. They just all fall off this cliff together, right? Mm-hmm. Just watching the person in front of them, and they all fall to the ground and die. That's the story of a lemming, right?
Right.
And we have to be careful here with this being this state of a republic where we don't have that common ground anymore. We don't have bridge builders anymore. It is my side or your side.
Right.
It is identity politics to the nth degree. Everything is moving to extremes. And so we have a two-party system that is on the sides of extremes now. And I think the majority of people, if you look at the middle class of America, I would think you would find the middle class is just like, where is the middle ground anymore? That's all we want. We just care about our families. We just care about our jobs. We just want security again. Why are we pushing so far out on these extremes?
Mm-hmm.
But it's this extremism that becomes very dangerous, and within a republic, and we'll see that this is one of the stages of losing your republic. History is littered with the ruins of past civilizations. And I don't think any of those past civilizations thought, well, this is it. Here we go. We're going off the cliff with the other lemmings.
Right. Time to collapse.
Time to collapse. I think I think that's what's so dangerous about when you get to these certain states in society is there has to be an awakening within the individual. Because collectively, this can't be fixed. Because collectively, we're all walking off a cliff together, right? Mm-hmm. And so it has to be this igniting of a fire within these individuals who can see what is truly happening and learn from history in the past to find these parallels to where we are today.
They have to begin to question their models, right? To start thinking outside of the box, pushing the envelope so that they can see outside their parties, outside their... In essence, this is what I think it is. It's when a society goes away from this ability to compromise, to find a common ground, people stop questioning. They're going over the cliff like the lemmings that you're talking about. But it's up to the individual to take a step out of these different parties or views and boxes and to look and see, where is this going off track? It's this fire, this ignited awakening that you're talking about, has to begin with the individual.
I feel like we've had to go over and kind of explain some of these things of where do we start in America? What's the belief in the ideas of America? And then we had to go in and kind of understand what a republic is. We had to see that government never stops growing. We had to see that because government never stops growing, they are going to try and get as much money as possible because they've made all these promises to everybody. We also see that it is because of moral decay where society starts eating itself from the inside. Because the politicians don't follow a moral code, neither do the collective people or the media follow a moral code. It becomes about the identity politics of it's my group or else. Next, it's time. Let's look at some cycles. Alexander Tytler was a contemporary of the Founding Fathers. He was a professor of universal history and Greek and Roman antiquities at the University of Edinburgh. And as he studied history, he found that many democracies and republics had this theme of democracy. And he called it the cycle of democracy. I love this cycle because it really shows where we're at today. Essentially, his intro into it, he talks about how you've got to be careful when the politicians learn that they can take money from the treasury and promise it to the people. Because then what the politicians do is what?
Well, it leads to a lot of promises that they can't keep. They start giving promises to all of the people. And in turn, the people start to vote for the guy that gives them more promises, offers them the most, right?
Yeah, so they stop looking for... They're not necessarily looking for the most moral person in there, the most honest person in there. They're looking for the person who promises the most free stuff.
Right. The most for them.
What do we hear today? Where is voting gone to? You see politicians get up there, and it is like this competition of, well, I can offer you a...
reduction in taxes, basic income, healthcare for everyone.
Oh, he's only offering you an F-150? I promise I'm going to get you an F-350.
Woo!
And so everything becomes free, and you're looking for who can give me the most, where can I get the most bang for my politician, right? Like, what are they going to give me?
Right.
You don't need a buck anymore. It's not the best bang for your buck because It's what can they give me so that I don't have to go out and get it myself, right? Free education, free housing. What else have we heard today?
Free healthcare.
Free healthcare. You know, and you go down the line and you have all of these promises. The reality is they're probably not going to be able to keep most of these promises.
Yeah, because when they say, you know, we're going to give this for free, we're going to do that for free, free isn't free. It's got to come from somewhere.
It always does. But this is where Tytler says, here's kind of the end of the beginning. When you start seeing politicians doing this, be weary, because now we know that we're going into these stages. This cycle, I love it. It is so beautiful. It's broad and it covers a lot of time. But let's see if we can recognize where we're at today. Tyler goes on to say that democracies last on average around 200 years. Let's do the math in America. Let's see since 1787, 2020, that's about 230 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're right on track,
right,
with the Tytler cycle. But let's see if it follows the cycle. How well it follows the cycle if he's right. So he says, in the beginning, right, of a democracy, you're going to start off with bondage to spiritual faith.
So bondage, and we move to spiritual faith.
Mm-hmm. And so if you look at early America, we're moving away from tyranny,
mm-hmm.
going to a place where we can follow our conscience.
Right, so where we can worship freely.
From spiritual faith, we move to courage. From courage, we move to liberty. From liberty, we go to abundance. It's like the government protecting your inalienable rights. It gives the power to that individual to create, to become an entrepreneur, to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Abundance then moves to selfishness. And then you move from selfishness to apathy. Apathy is this state of, I don't care.
I think this is a lot of where we are today, right?
I think we are in such an apathetic state. Look at we hear a lot about this silent majority of people just don't want to ruffle any feathers.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to live their lives. And so you have this small percentage, this mob who is trolling and ruling over the internet and making people feel ashamed of, well, I believe this way. I believe this way. I just need to be quiet. Selfishness to apathy. Apathy moves to dependency. That goes along with what we were just talking about before. Dependent on who?
The government.
We're not dependent on ourselves anymore. I'm going to make a better life for me. It is, who's going to make a better life for me? And this is what we call to the politicians and look to the politicians for, is who will make a better life for me? What will you do for me? What promises will you give me?
That's exactly what's going on right now.
It's exactly what's going on. And once dependency hits, after dependency, you move back into bondage.
Because you've given all of your rights over to the government in place of some sense of security, some sense of normalcy.
And this is the danger of a government that keeps on growing. This is the danger of losing our freedoms and giving them away freely because of the word crisis.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens when we start losing our moral compass, our inner voice that says, whoa, 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 this doesn't feel right. Stand up against this, because we're in this state of apathy.
Mm-hmm.
Dependency is just a natural consequence of apathy.
It's that next step.
And then the next step after that is bondage. This is why we're moving into such a fast pace of starting to see. We're watching these cycles happen in real life. That's what's so fun about the time we live in right now. You couldn't have written this. He wrote this back in the 1700s. You couldn't have written it better for what's happening in today's society.
Well, we followed exactly that pattern. And he wrote this before we had followed it, right?
He wrote this about when we were about starting out.
Yeah, brand new.
Brand new. It's pretty amazing. You see that the cycles of history don't lie.
Human nature doesn't lie.
And that's the reason. It always comes back to human nature.
Mm-hmm.
We always think we come to this progressive state where we could never go back and be like past societies. We would never be like them. But then in the end, we all come to this place of, oh, we became them, just like them.
It reminds me of Animal Farm, where they kind of rise up, they have their rebellion, they set up their new form of government, their establishment, and everybody's so excited, they're free, they're finally free from the farmer, and then slowly, little by little, the rights that they had just fought for and changed for slowly are taken away until one day they find, oh, our leaders became what we ran from in the first place, what we fought to get away from in the beginning.
And those leaders that we're talking about, they're the ones that push us into this bondage, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll take care of you. You don't need to worry about a thing. We have you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a way to live. Once you give up that higher ground, though, you can never get it back. That's why we can never go backwards to where we were. But what we can do is see what's happening and make the needed changes now before we fall off the cliff. Here's the beautiful thing of bondage. I know it sounds terrible. Bondage always takes us back to a place of faith.
Right, and the cycle repeats.
And the cycle repeats itself.
To tie in some points from Tytler's cycle, we wanted to go into a scripture that talks about what happens when the politicians start to make these promises that they can't keep, when we start taking the steps through this pattern. So the chapter we want to go to of scripture is Ezekiel 22. We want to start in verse 25 and go through to 31. So James, do you want to start us off in 25?
The Bible is the great teacher of human nature. It is so beautiful. It just keeps on pulling out these patterns. And here's one. There is a conspiracy of her prophets in the midst thereof, like a roaring lion ravening the prey. They have devoured souls. They have taken the treasure and precious things. They have made her many widows in the midst thereof. Just like we were talking about this is where it begins. When the politicians, the leaders, quote unquote prophets, start taking the precious things, the treasures.
Yeah, and there's conspiracies in their midst, right? And right here it says, they have made her many widows in the midst thereof, right? They're making these promises they can't keep, and in so doing, the individual is made destitute.
26. Her priests have violated my law and have profaned mine holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and profane, neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. If you look at this not a point of view of a churchy way, but look at it from a profanity of the sacred rights of man,
Mm-hmm.
it describes our leaders perfectly.
Everything's kind of been blasphemed and degraded.
And they allow certain things to happen that are not making us feel necessarily safe. Her princes in the midst thereof are like wolves ravening the prey to shed blood and to destroy souls to get dishonest gain.
To get dishonest gain. If that is not exactly what's going on today, I don't know what is.
And her prophets have daubed them with untempered mortar, seeing vanity and divining lies unto them, saying, Thus saith the Lord God, when the Lord hath not spoken.
So what do you think that's saying? I really like this.
Well, I love the visual of untempered mortar.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like it's not going to set, or it's not going to set right.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning you don't have the foundation of your bricks, right?
Right. And the divining lies, they're just coming up with stuff that is not true, right? And if you look down here, they are saying, quote unquote, thus saith the Lord, when the Lord hath not spoken, right? So they're claiming this nigh ungodly authority and power saying, well, this is good and right, and we know it. Just shush, and listen. And God's saying, this is not what I've told them to do. This is not the plan for our nation. So let's go to 29.
The people of the land have used oppression and exercised robbery, and have vexed the poor and needy. Yea, they have oppressed the stranger wrongfully. They say they're going to do one thing, and they say they're doing it in the name of this. We're going to help these people and this group of people and this group of people. But it's not their agenda ever. They're using oppression as a means to get gain in other areas.
This almost feels like the riots that are coming about because of their promises. You deserve this. You've been downtrodden. You've been this. So the people of the land, the common man, have used oppression, have exercised robbery, right? I deserve this. They have vexed the poor and the needy. We're going to loot. We're going to steal. We're going to beat up. We're going to rob. And they have oppressed the stranger wrongfully. I don't care who you are. I'm taking what's mine because I've been told I deserve this because of my whatever, right? Because of my oppressed and unprivileged upbringing.
30. And I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. Where's George Washington?
Yeah, where's the bridge builder of our day?
Who can bring the two groups together?
He's not found. I found none.
Therefore have I poured out mine indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. Their own way have I recompensed upon their heads, saith the Lord God. The curse cometh, right?
Right. What I think the curse is it's the curse of our own destruction upon our own heads, right? I think so many times in the scriptures or throughout history, people think that when God says, I sent mine indignation, that was hard to say, or when I send my wrath or my fires, people are like, oh, God's just going to burn us up and destroy this and that. But I think what God is really saying is, I am sending my anger that you've strayed from my word, but your destruction will come by your own hand because you've strayed from that which is true and right.
This is why it's so important that we study the cycles of history. We're starting to see a picture, I hope, and I hope we're explaining it well enough that people can understand where we're at in our nation today. And we're going to keep going further. That's a scary thing.
Yeah, I feel like these episodes are kind of a baby step walkthrough of history to find out where we're at today. So it might not be these huge bursts all at once of, whoa, this is where we're at. But I think it's this slow pushing of the envelope so that we can see the grand picture of where we were and where we've come.
If you understand the cycles of history, here's what you can get today, is that this is going to be a turbulent decade. It will be one of political unrest, conflict between social classes, racial divisions, economic downturns and famine, and lastly, war.
We've seen all of those in some form or fashion, right? Even down to war. You see that in the streets today on small scale. There are battles being fought, riots being had.
Well, and that's why there will be little peace this decade. It's not going to get better.
No.
There is no going back.
Because we've crossed the Rubicon.
Because we've crossed the Rubicon, and that's what that's what the thesis of today is. We're not going back. It's just going to build upon itself, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's going to be hard to find stability. It will be, as listening to the politicians, it will be smoke and mirrors. Just when you think the world is going back to normal, another event is going to happen. And it's going to put us all in this state of, what? How could that have happened? How could it have gotten worse? It's going to shake our confidence. But this will be the decade that will define our generation. It will be the generation. It will be the decade that will define our heritage.
And it will set the stage for future generations.
How we have taken for granted the freedoms that our founding fathers have put into place for us. We had the greatest freedoms ever known to mankind. And it is these same freedoms that has allowed us to trample them under our feet.
It's that saying, with great power comes great responsibility. With this great liberty comes a great sense of care, or it ought to, right? You must be very careful. And in so many ways we haven't.
Because of that, we've failed ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Our leaders have failed us if we've seen the cycles of where we're at. They're no longer our voice. They're the voice of the mob. They're no longer watching out for our natural rights or our inalienable rights. They're watching out for themselves.
Yeah. In fact, they are robbing those from us and trampling on them in a lot of ways.
But yet, many of us will still continue to believe their propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Because as things get bad, we'll turn to somebody. We'll want somebody to fix it.
Yeah, everybody, especially in a time of crisis, seeks a voice, seeks some semblance of peace and security.
And what we'll find is that they won't have the power to fix it.
Is there anybody with the power to fix it? Does it come from the individual?
Well, I think that's the answer that we have to look for through the threads of history.
So toward the beginning of the episode today, we talked about the story of the glassblowers, how they were in this high heat, high temperature rooms in this factory. They had to drink tons of water, 7.5 gallons a day just to survive. And many of them would retain some of the water, so they would just bloat up. They couldn't sweat, they couldn't get rid of it, and they had to be taken out and massaged to get their glands working, to start sweating, to start feeling alive again. And we want to liken that to today, where there's so much tension out and about. There's so much uncertainty. We're being bombarded and bloated and overloaded with information on all sides. We have this uncertainty of the election on the horizon. We have fear of riots in the streets, of unrest. We want, with this, to share a scripture in Isaiah. So we are reading from the NIV translation of the Bible, and we're in Isaiah 42, and we just want to read verses 24 and 25.
24, who handed Jacob over to become loot, and Israel to the plunderers? If you look at Jacob in Israel, who does that represent?
It's our nation today.
Our people, our nation.
Mm-hmm.
Was it not the Lord against whom we have sinned? For they would not follow his ways. They did not obey his law. When you desecrate the laws of God, or the sacredness, or the religiosity, or the respect of what a nation represents,
it becomes loot. It becomes plundered. It becomes destroyed.
You allow the robbers to come in, the thieves to come in at night, and take what you have built, what you have created. 25, so he poured out on them his burning anger, the violence of war. It enveloped them in flames, yet they did not understand. It consumed them, but they did not take it to heart. Here comes the fire, yet the people did not understand. Why? Why is this happening to us?
I don't think people understand because they don't know how to look at the cycles of history. I don't think they know exactly where to go to find truth, to find these patterns, to find understanding. I think a lot of people view this and think, this will blow over. This will pass. We're going back to normal. But right here it says, no, I will send you my burning anger and the violence of war. This is what we've chosen by not obeying the laws of God.
And I think this is what's so beautiful is you understand and you see where it's coming from, where the history is going, then you can take it to heart. And that gives the ability to man to rise up and to follow his conscience once again.
Yeah, because I think the heart represents understanding and feeling. You get that deepest knowledge of, oh, and now I see, and now I feel.
And that's why in the next episode, we want to talk about the difference between crossroads, tipping points, and turnings. Thank you for listening.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
to